in a basic training, infantry training camp. And that we'd get 13 weeks of training and probably go on to somewhere else. Well, it turned out we only got 9, a few of us only got 9. And Camp Roberts was definitely the worst place I ever got to while I was in the military. Politics was very important there. All the non-coms and the officers, they played favorites, and you had to be careful of what you did. But we didn't do much training, really. Most of it, I guess, was to get us to accept military discipline. And we practiced plenty of that, and did quite a bit of marching and those kind of silly things. And with discipline, they handed out discipline like we were little children. These were new barracks, and they were planting grass, and the ground was kind of cloddy, and I don't know what we did, but we got disciplined by having to go out there and crush those clods with our hands. We did that for 2 hours. And one time, one of the non-coms got mad at us, and he made us scrub the barracks walls with toothbrushes and silly things like that. We were marching one time. I had 2 left feet. I couldn't stay in step very well. We were marching out on the tarmac. It got 130 degrees out there. Some of the guys passed out. But we were marching along, and I guess I got out of step, and one of the sergeants came up and grabbed me and jerked me out and said, "Get to the back." And I said, well, I thought I was in step with the guy ahead of me. "Don't you talk back." So, okay, he put me to the back, and when we got back to barracks, I asked the platoon sergeant, I said, "Am I going to get disciplined for that?" "No," I said. So anyhow, that's the way the training went there. Then we loaded up some part of the division at Norfolk, Virginia, and part of Newport News. And the one ship was the steamship USS Bliss. And one guy, of course, immediately named it the Listing Bliss. And we started overseas, and on the way over, they got out the bazooka. That was a secret weapon. We went ahead with our landing, and we hit a German division immediately, and had a pretty tough fight early on. And they finally gave ground, and then they wanted us to cut off the western half of Sicily. So we moved east or west along the south shore to Agrigento, and there we were to head north to the capital, Palermo. It was on the north shore. It was kind of funny. There we ran into Italian soldiers, and the Italians didn't want to fight. And we saw a whole bunch of them go into a stone house, and so we decided we'd throw a shell at them and see what happened. We happened to accidentally throw a smoke shell. It wasn't a high explosive, just made smoke. And oh, here they came out with their hands up, and there were 60 of them came out of there. And here they came with their hands up, and some of the guys decided they'd take him back to the POW place, and we heard some hollering, and here came 6 more. They didn't want to be left behind. One of the guys said, "Now that's the way to fight a war." But then we headed for Palermo, and I don't know whether all the details of this are true or not, but it was said that we were racing with Patton's 2nd Armored Division. We were going straight north, and Patton was coming from the southeast. And Patton had given orders that nobody was supposed to enter Palermo until his troops got there. So our commander was Lucian Truscott. He was the Lieutenant General. And I forgot to tell you, when we got ready for Sicily, we did do one thing. He made us hike a mile in 15 minutes with full combat gear. And we called it the Truscott Trot. Oh boy, it paid off. We headed north. I don't remember, I think it was about a little over 100 miles. But what he had us do, we'd hike 10 miles, and they'd load us up on trucks that haul us 10 miles or so, or another distance. They'd go back and get another group, and they'd leapfrog us. And by doing that, we were in Palermo by the next morning. And when Patton's Armored Division came into town, there were all the infantry troops already there. Somebody said he was real unhappy about that. I don't know if that's all true or not, but it was fun to think that. They took us back to Palermo, and we turned in our heavy equipment. We were supposed to go to England for that second front. We'd already been fighting over a year. We weren't too anxious about that, but we were supposed to go. And they made a fresh division came from the States, and they made a landing near Naples in Italy, in southern Italy. And they must have had bad leadership because they got in bad trouble. And they reissued us our heavy equipment, and away we went to that Salerno beachhead. And when we went ashore there was still machine gun fire on the beach 10 days after the invasion, and that's a no-no, you know. But we got the Germans driven back and took Naples and then headed for Rome. Well, we were at Anzio, 30 miles southeast of Rome. And boy, that turned out to be a hellhole. We could have gone right on and taken Rome. But the commander of the 2nd Corps got cold feet, and he said, no, we'll be overextended, we're going to dig in here. And that was a mistake. We could have, the main front was to the south of us, and we were actually behind the German lines. And we could have cut off the main supply route for the Germans. But he got, like I said, got cold feet. And we had 10 square miles that we held. And it was a horseshoe-shaped thing with the sea behind us and the mountain range ringing around. And the Germans were sitting up in those mountains. They could see every move we made. You know, boy, that was something. In the daytime, you better stay in your hole because they're going to shoot at you. And that was the last. The Germans hit us for 3 days, and they finally gave up. They saw they couldn't make it. And boy, they lost a lot of people. And of course, we lost quite a few too, but nothing like they did. So they called a truce, an 8-hour truce, to go out and pick up all the dead and wounded. And the only people allowed out there were the American and German and British medics and the chaplains. And they went out there and they got the bodies, and they got our 2 medics went out. We had 2 medics in our company, and one of them told me that they worked together, all 3, the Germans and the British and Americans, helped each other. And when they finally had to part, one of the Germans said, "You got any cigarettes?" And our medic said, "Well, yeah, I smoke." He said, "We can't get any cigarettes. How about a cigarette?" So he handed him his package of cigarettes, and we had no trouble getting cigarettes. I didn't smoke, but they furnished them after we got overseas. You didn't even have to pay for it. But so he gave that German his cigarettes. And after the truce was over, we went to shooting again. But that was really nice, that 8 hours of quiet. You could walk around and get with the guys and shoot the bull a little and things like that. But it was a bad experience. And we were there till early in May, and we finally broke out. And we took Rome and cut that highway, but the Germans saw the handwriting on the wall and they pulled their troops back so we wouldn't capture them. The next morning, a couple of us guys went out to see the town, and the MP stopped us. And he said, "Where are you guys' neckties?" "Well, we don't have any neckties." "Well, you have to wear neckties in Naples." "Well, we don't have any. We're in the combat infantry. We don't have any neckties." And one of them said, "Open your shirt." So I opened my shirt. "Where's your undershirt?" "Well, I don't have an undershirt." They put us in jail. Well, I don't know if this is true or not, but we heard later that our general heard about it, and that he was supposed to have called George Marshall in Washington and said, if my boys aren't out of jail by sundown, I'm going to take that damn town back. Well, he didn't have to. We were out before sundown. We caught several German divisions on what they called an administrative move. In other words, they're relocating. They were heading north. They were trying to get away from the fighting and get set up again. And we caught them in kind of a little valley between two high ridges. And we were on the east ridge. The 15th Infantry was on the west side. They were going down the highway, the Jerry's, and there was also a railroad track and a river paralleling this highway. We caught them in there, and of course we poured everything on them we could. And they still used a lot of horses. And gosh, the horses we killed, it was terrible. Later on we heard there was 13 miles of that destruction. And it's something that you just never forget. After we left Strasbourg, what happened then, the Germans still had a bridgehead between Strasbourg and Switzerland on the west side of the Rhine River, and they were trying desperately to hold on to that. So that was about the time that the Battle of the Bulge was happening, and they were afraid that the Germans might be able to break out down there, so they sent us down there to eliminate that bridgehead. And it was cold. You couldn't penetrate the earth, you couldn't dig a foxhole, and snow on the ground. And the only way you could protect yourself was try to find cover in a building or some such a thing as that. And boy, the Germans, they really fought. They wanted to hold that. And one night, during the day, it was dark, I had to go to our company headquarters, and I was walking along, and I stepped in a darn canal. And that darn thing the water was about up to my neck. And it was in the winter time, and the water wasn't frozen because it was moving. And I was just barely able to reach up and get a hold of the bank and pull myself up out of there. Boy, I was cold. The company headquarters was in a house. And luckily, they had a little heat in there, and I was able to dry my clothes. And by the way, when we went back and followed the route that my division took, I saw that stinking little canal. It's still there, 60 years later. While we were in Strasbourg, I forgot to mention, we were in a school building there, and on Christmas Day they had set up the kitchen. They had turkey and all the trimmings for us. And there was a little girl there, about 10 years old, little German girl, and she came every day and visited with me, and I gave her candy and things that I really liked that little girl, and she said I should come meet her mother, and I said, well, where's your father? Well, he's in the German army. And I said, well, we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to go into civilian homes. But she explained all the Nazi stuff to me. And unfortunately, we got our march order in the middle of the night. And I would have liked to have got her address and kept in touch with her, but we had to leave. We got to the Siegfried line, and we had to break through that. That was pretty difficult. But the Germans were starting to soften up a little bit by then. And we crossed the Rhine River. The engineers had made some boats that we went across on, and we didn't run into too much resistance there. We didn't lose too many people. And from there on, it was more or less catching up with them, having a firefight, and they'd move back and we'd catch up again, and another firefight, and so on. And they did try to hold Munich, but we finally drove them out of there, and then it wasn't so bad from then on. But we finally wound up in Austria, really Berchtesgaden, Germany, first. Then there's been a lot of controversy who took Hitler's eagle nest first, and we claimed we did, and we don't know for sure. I have a lot of respect, and never will lose my respect for the American and German and British soldiers. The French, I don't have a bit of use for the French. One of the guys said, well, here we are fighting their war and they're romancing the women. And that was about it. But like I said, we called the Jerrys the Jerrys. They were darn good soldiers, and so were the British. And I'll always have a very high regard for those guys. That was a war I never heard of one guy complain because he had to serve in the military during World War II, because we all knew that was a war we had to fight. I told you a while ago that our company strength was 220 originally, but they told us when the war ended there were 19 of us left of those 220. And I was the only one of our 5 buddies that was still standing. So it was a pretty good price to pay, but it had to be done. I forgot to tell you too, if anybody ever says that the concentration camps didn't happen, I saw Dachau at its worst, and it did happen. And you couldn't believe that people could be so inhumane to other humans. But it was that way, exactly the way they told it. And the other thing that always bothered me and the rest of the guys in the company is that in that Battle of the Bulge that they got caught so flat-footed. You know, they were surprised when the Germans hit them. And here again, I repeat again, we always had patrols out. We knew what the enemy was doing. We even had what we called a battle patrol, 25 guys. They'd go out and look for a fight to see how strong they were. And these people evidently didn't have any idea those Germans were building a mass of troops and tanks to attack. I don't know how they kept from knowing that. You heard about that Malmedy massacre, where there were around 100 American troops gave up. They were disarmed like regular prisoners, and they took them out in the field and shot them in cold blood, all of them. And, of course, that was the SS did that. The regular German soldier wasn't that. When we captured some of them, they were just like us. They were doing their job that they had to do, and whenever they gave up, they were finished. They knew that there wasn't any point anymore. Oh, there were a few of the Nazis that you had to kill them. They wouldn't quit. And some of Benito Mussolini's black shirts, they called them, or some of those, they were the minority by far. We had to kill them if they didn't want to give up. I never talk about the gruesome details. I had a little trouble after the war ended. You know, you have to give up your rifle that you carried for over 3 years, and everything is focused on, all your efforts focused on killing people. That's all you know. And you know, we got where we thought, well, is there even a different life anywhere? And I'm not kidding, that's true. We really got to thinking that. And but Darlene and my dad, they took me under their wing, and I coped. I still mourn my buddies.